Good morning, everybody. Still finishing my coffee here, so I'm not a morning person, so I'm still a little slow moving here. I just finished this book, Everyday Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck. This is the second book of hers that I've read. The first one was Nothing Special. They're both really beautiful books, and they're just transcribed talks that she has given over the years. And so each chapter or section, however you want to categorize it, is shorter and can be read in a few minutes, which I do in the mornings, and it's a really great way to start the day. And I've learned a lot about meditation and Buddhism from her books, so highly recommend. But the very last section in this book is called The Parable of Mushin. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it really moved me and actually inspired me to write a song. So I want to read the parable to you. It's, for our short attention span online mindset, it's long, but it's just a couple pages here. And so I'm going to read it, and then I'll play for you the song that it inspired. I think it's worth the time to hear this story. It's really profound. Once upon a time, in a town called Hope, there lived a young man called Joe. Joe was much into Dharma studies, and so he had a Buddhist name. Joe was called Mushin. Joe lived a life like anyone else. He went to work, and he had a nice wife. But despite Joe's interest in the Dharma, Joe was a macho, know-it-all, bitter guy. In fact, he was so much that way that one day, after he'd created all sorts of mayhem at work, his boss said, "I've had enough of you, Joe, you're fired." And so Joe left, no job. And then when he got home, he found a letter from his wife, and she said, "I've had enough, Joe, I'm leaving." So Joe had an apartment and himself and nothing else. But Joe, Mushin, was not one who gave up easily. He vowed that although he didn't have a job and wife, he was going to have the one thing in life that really mattered: enlightenment. And off he rushed to the nearest bookstore. Joe looked through the latest crop of books on how to achieve enlightenment, and there was one that he found especially interesting. It was called How to Catch the Train of Enlightenment. So he bought the book and poured through it with care, and when he'd studied it thoroughly, he went home and gave up his apartment. He put all his earthly belongings in his backpack and went off to the train station on the edge of town. The book said that if you followed all its directions, you do this and you do that and you do that, that when the train came, you'd be able to catch it. And he thought, great. Joe went down to the train station, which was a deserted place, and he read the book once again, memorizing the directions, and then settled down to wait. He waited and waited and waited. 2, 3, 4 days he waited for the train of enlightenment to come, because the book said it was sure to come. And he had great faith in this book. Sure enough, on the 4th day, he heard this great roar in the distance, enormous roar, and he knew this must be the train, so he got ready. He was so excited because the train was coming, he could hardly believe it, and whoosh, it went by. It was only a blur, it went by so fast. What had happened? He couldn't catch it at all. Joe was bewildered, but not discouraged. He got out his book again and studied some more exercises, and he worked and worked and worked as he sat on the platform, putting everything he had into it. In another 3 or 4 days, he once again heard a tremendous roar in the distance, and this time he was certain he would catch the train. All of a sudden, there it was. Whoosh! It was gone. Well, what to do? Because obviously there was a train. It wasn't as though there was no train. He knew that, but he could not catch it. So he studied more, and he tried some more, and he worked, and the same thing happened over and over again. As time went on, other people also went to the bookstore and bought the book. So Joe began to have company. First, there were 4 or 5 people watching for the train, and then there were 30 or 40 people watching for the train. The excitement was tremendous. Here was the answer, obviously coming. They could all hear the roar as the train went by, and although nobody ever caught it, there was great faith that somehow, someday, at least one of them would catch it. If even one person could catch it, it would inspire the rest. So the little crowd grew, and the excitement was wonderful. As time went on, however, Mushin noticed that some of the people brought their little kids. And they were so absorbed in looking for the train that when the kids tried to get Mom and Dad's attention, they were told, "Don't bother us, just go play." These little kids were really being neglected. Mushin, who was not such a bad guy after all, began to wonder, well, gee, I'd like to watch for the train, but somebody's got to take care of the kids. So he began to devote some time to them. He looked in his backpack and took out his nuts and raisins and chocolate bars and passed all this stuff out to the kids. Some of them were really hungry. The parents who were watching for the train didn't seem to get hungry, but their kids were hungry. And they had skin knees, so he found a few Band-Aids in his backpack and took care of their knees, and he read them stories from their little books. And it began to be that while he still took some time for the train, the kids were beginning to be his chief concern. There were more and more of them. In a few months, there were also teenagers, and with teenagers, there's a lot of wild energy. So Mushin organized the teenagers and set up a baseball team in the back of the station. He started a garden to keep them occupied, and he even encouraged some of the steadier kids to help him. And before you knew it, he had a large enterprise going, and he had less and less time for the train, and he was angry about it. The important stuff was happening with the adults waiting for the train, but he had to take care of all this business with the kids. And so his anger and his bitterness were boiling, but no matter what, he knew he had to care for the kids. So he did. Over time, hundreds and thousands of train watchers arrived with all their kids and relatives. Mushin was so harried with all the needs of the people that he had to add on to the train station. He had to make more sleeping quarters. He had to build a post office and schools, and he was busy. But his anger and his resentment were also right there. I'm only interested in enlightenment. Those other people get to watch the train, and what am I doing, really? But he kept doing it. And then one day he remembered that while he'd thrown out most of the books in his apartment, for some reason he had kept one small volume. So he fished it out of his backpack. The book was How to Do Zazen. So Joe had a new set of instructions to study, but these didn't seem so bad. He settled down and learned how to do Zazen. Early in the morning, before everyone else was up, he'd sit on a cushion and do this practice for a while. And over time, this hectic, demanding schedule in which he had unwillingly become immersed didn't seem so much of a strain for him. He began to think that maybe there was some connection between the zazen, the sitting, and the peace he was beginning to feel. A few others at the station were also getting a bit discouraged about the train they couldn't catch, so they began to sit with him. The group did zazen every morning, and at the same time, the train-watching enterprise kept expanding. And at the next train station down the tracks, there's a whole new colony of train watchers. The same old problems were developing there, so sometimes his group would go there and help in straightening out their difficulties. And there's even a third train station. Endless work. They were really, really busy. From morning till night, they were feeding the kids, doing carpentry, running the post office, setting up the new little clinic, all that a community needs to function and survive. And all this time, they weren't getting to watch for the train. It just kept going by. They could hear the roar, and some jealousy and bitterness were still there, but still they had to admit it wasn't the same anymore. It was there and it wasn't there. The turning point for Mushin was when he tried something described in his little book as sesshin. He got together with his group, and in the corner of the train station they set up a separate space, and for 4 or 5 days they would steadily do zazen. Occasionally they'd hear the roar of the train in the distance, but they ignored it and went on sitting. And they also introduced this hard practice to other train stations. Mushin was now in his 50s. He was showing the effect by the years of strain and toil. He was getting bent and weary. But by now he no longer worried about the things he used to worry about. He had forgotten the big philosophical questions that used to grip him. Do I exist? Is life real? Is life a dream? He was so busy sitting and working that everything faded out except for what needed to be done every day. The bitterness faded. The big questions faded. Finally, there was nothing left for Mushin except what had to be done. But he no longer felt it had to be done. He just did it. By now, there was an enormous community of people at the train stations, working, bringing up their children, as well as those who were waiting for the train. Some of those slowly were absorbed back into the community, and others would come. Mushin finally came to love the people watching for the train, too. He served them, helped them to watch. So it went for many years. Mushin got older and older, more and more tired, and his questions were down to 0. There were none anymore. There was just Mushin and his life, doing each second what needed to be done. One night, for some reason, Mushin thought, I will sit all night. I don't know why I want to do it, I'll just do it. For him, sitting was no longer a question of looking for something, just trying to improve, trying to be holy. Sorry, I read that sentence wrong. For him, sitting was no longer a question of looking for something, trying to improve, or trying to be holy. All those ideas had faded years ago. For Mushin, there was nothing except just sitting, hearing a few distant cars at night, feeling the cool night air, enjoying the changes in his body. Mushin sat and sat through the night, and at daybreak he heard the roar of the train. Then very gently, the train came to a stop exactly in front of him. He realized that from the very beginning, he had been on the train. In fact, he was the train itself. There was no need to catch the train, nothing to realize, nowhere to go, just the wholeness of life itself. All the ancient questions that were no questions answered themselves. And at last the train evaporated, and there was just an old man sitting the night away. Mushin stretched and arose from his cushion. He went and fixed morning coffee to share with those arriving for work. And the last we see of him, he's in the carpentry shop with some of the older boys, building a swing set for the playground. That's the story of Mushin. What was it Mushin found? I'll leave that to you. So beautiful. I feel like I could talk for hours about what it means and how I interpret it, why it feels so meaningful to me and moving to me. But I feel like that might take away from its meaning for you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. After I read that, I sat down at the piano and came out with a little song that was inspired by this. So I'll play that for you now. I hope you enjoy it.